Morning. This morning I have the privilege of introducing to you a very special guest that we have at our church. Pastor Eumin has served as an English ministry and as a UMC pastor in the New York area for numerous years. And I've had the privilege of knowing him and his family and his children through various different conferences and different things throughout the years. And I've always been blessed by Pastor Eumin, by his passion and his humility in the way not only that he speaks, but in the way that he lives his life. The first time that I actually met Pastor Eumin was I was a counselor. He was my counselor trainer back in 2003 in Dallas. And I remember he shared his testimony during that conference. And I think some of us in the back over there, some of you college kids, unknowing to me, were actually present there at the same time and might remember the testimony that Pastor Eumin gave. And I still remember to the day the power and the humility in which he spoke with. And it's been like that every single time that I've heard Pastor Eumin speak. The reason why we have him speaking for us this morning is, like I shared with you last week, Advent season for us is not just waiting for Jesus, but it's really understanding why we wait and celebrate the birth of Christ, the mission of Jesus. And so this Advent season for us is almost like missions month for us. It's to understand that it's our job, not only as we await the birth of Christ, but to understand why Jesus came, the mission with which Jesus came. And so Pastor Eumin, actually, in 2 days from today, on Tuesday, him and his entire family, him and his wife, Purume, and his baby girl, Yadi, and his newly born son, Eli, they will be moving to Kazakhstan on Tuesday. So they're moving in 2 days. And he has graciously agreed to come in the midst of all the busyness of packing and moving and all that kind of stuff, to come and share his story, his heart, and a little bit about what he will be doing on the mission field. And so as he comes up, please let's greet him with a warm welcome and open up our hearts and ears for what he has to say. Pastor Eumin. It's really good being here, and I'm not just saying that. During the time when we were just praising, and this is a beautiful sanctuary, and the light coming in. I'm going to be in Kazakhstan in 2 days. Well, it'll take 2 days, so 4 days from now. I'll be flying in 2 days, and then it'll be 2 days later I'll be there. But the churches, and I've had an opportunity when I went last year to meet with some of the leaders and pastors of the churches there. They're not like this. And so I was getting very nostalgic as I was sitting here and thinking, this beautiful church, there's some hostility toward Christians, and it's a little more difficult there, and the freedom to worship, this beautiful place. The gifts of the music, not that they're not musical, but the church is at a much more basic state. Still meeting in homes, and if you have someone that can play piano, maybe that's as good as it's going to get. And so just the blessing of being here and feeling really nostalgic. But this is sort of the last time that I'll worship in this kind of context. It's going to be so different for a couple years at least. It's a 3-year commitment where I'm going, but after 3 years they kind of reassess to see if continued mission work in that area needs to be done, or if I need to be sent to a different place to do mission work. But I see myself being there long term. I'm not thinking 3 years, interesting life experience, and then I'll come back, but that I've committed my life, and if God wants me to be there, to die in Kazakhstan, then so be it. That's the kind of mentality that I have as I go. I realize in talking at different places and to different people that I almost have to do a Kazakhstan or Central Asia 101, because people don't even know where it is or what it is, and they have no concept whatsoever. And so I'm going to kind of do 2 things today, where it's a little bit of an educational thing on where I'll be going and what I'll be doing, but also giving you the Word of God and how that relates. So I'll start with, I would say, a 5-minute PowerPoint presentation about my Kazakhstan and my placement there. I forgot that before I go into that, my wife and I, our purpose there we are going as missionaries, but we're going also as co-directors of the United Methodist Mission Center for Central Asia. And so the Mission Center for Central Asia is really sort of the hub or the center, as it's called, that really is there to try to equip the Methodist Church in Central Asia. And in Central Asia right now there are 15 United Methodist churches and Bible groups. The difference between a Bible group and a church there right now is basically, do you have enough people and do you have enough leadership to become a church? And if not, you're still just kind of meeting in homes as a Bible group. But they're all sort of very similar, very small, like home-type churches that are really starting to develop. And the Mission Center's purpose is to really equip and empower and to grow these churches and also develop new churches. And works through working with the pastors, doing leadership conferences. I'll be in some sense a mentor to some of these pastors who are very young and new to the faith. We bring in professors and other people that can train the laity and train some of the pastors in this part of the world. And so the Mission Center is just working to build a church in that part of the world and do whatever it can to help in that process. My wife and I are co-directors of that Mission Center. Okay. Right. So I'm just going to share a little bit about Kazakhstan with you. We'll be living in Kazakhstan, but Central Asia is actually the 5 stans, 3 of which have United Methodist churches: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan. And so that's known as the Central Asia region of the world. And where is that? Okay. If you can see that large landmass to the very top, that's Russia. So it's right below Russia. It's west of China. It's north of the Middle East and India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and it's east of Europe. So it's kind of in the middle of the converging of lots of different cultures and peoples. And in some sense, that's what my experience was of Central Asia and Kazakhstan. It really is like a melting pot, a melding of Middle Eastern, Russian, Asian, even European culture into kind of one entity. And as I shared, that's a close-up of Kazakhstan. And the Mission Center is in Almaty, which is the southern part right above Kyrgyzstan there. And I'll show you a picture of the actual Mission Center in a little bit. But that's Central Asia. And one of the things about Central Asia, and one of the reasons why I feel it's so central in terms of the church right now, is everyone wants a part of Central Asia because of this. It has huge untapped natural resources. And in fact, it's considered to be, by 2015, the 3rd largest oil reserve in all of the world. And so even when we went, there's all these companies, all this development. If there are people, there are a lot of Korean companies, because Koreans are at the forefront of, just trying to come in and maximize here. But it's a country that there's a lot of development, there's a lot of resources, there's a lot of things happening, and there's a lot of, not just economically, but even religiously, because it was part of the Soviet Union, which dissolved in 1992. With that, lots of different religious beliefs, lots of different groups, social agencies are trying to come and really do what they, try to proselytize what they want to share. The ethnic diversity, as I shared, it's very diverse, where it's predominantly Kazakh, but there's a strong Russian contingency. There's Ukrainian and quite a few pockets of smaller ethnicities, including a Korean entity there, and I'll explain a little more about that as well. They speak 2 languages, Kazakh and Russian. The majority of people know Russian, but I was told by a native Kazakh that within 20 years, the majority of people are going to know Kazakh and not Russian, because they're reclaiming their national identity. It was part of the Soviet Union, therefore it spoke Russian, but with it becoming an independent nation again, they're reclaiming the Kazakh culture and the Kazakh language, and they're not teaching Russian in schools anymore, they're teaching Kazakh. So
there's a real cultural shift that's going to happen that includes language and other things as well. As you can see, Kazakhstan has a religious diversity, although I wouldn't really call it that diverse. It's mostly a Muslim nation, where 70% of the people are Muslim. But there is, because of the Russian influence again, the Russian Orthodox Church has a presence in Kazakhstan as well. And the Protestant presence, which is part of these other smaller ethnic, not ethnic, but religious sort of groupings, I would say the Protestant Church is probably 5% of Kazakhstan. And so, not Kazakhstan, but Central Asia. And so it really is just kind of beginning to surface in terms of the gospel, you know, and who Christ is and the significance of that. There's something that everyone in Kazakhstan, Central Asia knows as Koryo Saram. I don't know if that's based on the Korean saram or not, but anyways, I don't know how they... But basically, there was a deportation of all Koreans within the Soviet Union during the era of Stalin to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. They literally boarded them up on trains and sent them there because it was the middle of nowhere, in the middle of winter, to basically die. You know, it was kind of an ethnic cleansing thing that was happening under Stalin. And so, in Kazakhstan, there is third, fourth, fifth, second, third, fourth, fifth generation Korean Kazakhs, Korean Russians that live. And so there's an influence of that, even in terms of the food. Korean food is everyone in Kazakhstan knows Korean food. And so that Korean ethnic presence, because of what happened, 70, 80 years ago, is still present there. And we actually, when we went, we visited the place, which was just a barren land, where they dropped everyone off, and over 25% of the people that were sent to Kazakhstan passed away that same winter. A couple of pictures. I don't have a lot because I don't live there yet, but I was there 10 days, so I'll show you a few pictures that I took when I was there. This is the Almaty region, which is the southern part. It's very mountainous, very, very, very lush, very beautiful. The northern part is mostly plains, flatlands. I think the western part is desert and very harsh terrain, but it's just different, diverse terrains. And the Kazakh culture is very much like the Mongolian culture in terms of traditionally living in these tents that they would establish. And they love to ride horseback. Horseback riding and warrior culture, which is very Mongolian as well, is very similar. Kazakh culture is very similar to that kind of Mongolian understanding of culture. While at the same time, again, having that Russian, this is a Russian Orthodox church that we visited, having a very Russian Orthodox influence because of being part of the Soviet Union for 80 years. So it's kind of a mixture of this sort of Eastern Russian culture with this Asian culture. And as I shared with you, in Almaty, where this picture was taken, there's a lot of development that's taking place because a lot of companies are trying to come in and utilize the resources that are very abundant. And so it's growing a lot, and there's, you can see sort of a mixture here of sort of ancient but also modern kind of building and architecture. And this is a picture of the mission center that my wife and I will be co-directors of. And again, it's this center. It's not a center like we know it here, where it's like, a 3-story building that takes up a whole block, but it's a home where, all the people come for training and mentoring and for conferences, and we bring professors in, and so it's sort of the central hub of how the Methodist Church is trying to expand in this part of the world. And when I was there last summer, I was I came as a keynote speaker for a conference where the pastors and the lay people of these Methodist churches and Bible groups all came together. And this was the conference center the retreat center that we were at, and this was a small group. And you can see again, the Kazakh look is kind of pretty much looks somewhat Korean or some type of Asian. So there's a very strong sort of Asian presence and look whether it be just totally Asian looking or some type of Asian kind of mix. The Asian presence and the Asian culture is very strong, actually. Okay, and that's it. In terms of just giving you a little bit of background in terms of where I'm going and that region of the world. So the first question that I'm normally asked is why Central Asia? It's a very obscure place to feel convicted that God wants me to go there and be a missionary. Other places are much more traditional in terms of mission sending places. This is not traditional. And as I shared with you before, I had an opportunity to go for 10 days last summer. And I could actually speak for a long time on my sense of calling and conviction to this part of the world. But I'm going to try to do it in 2 minutes. To make a long story short, I believe that God burdened my heart, and I think that burden is the right word, burdened my heart for the people in that part of the world, the Central Asian people, especially the ones that I was able to interact with, the leaders of the churches, and also burdened my heart especially for the church and for the growth of the church in Central Asia. And what causes someone to feel a burden in their heart? And I want to articulate that a little clearer. And I think for me, it's the sense of connection that I had to the culture and people of Central Asia. My wife shared with me that even 1 month, 2 months into me coming back home from my short-term mission trip there, that I might physically have come home, but mentally and spiritually I was still over there. And I remember having a conversation with her where I shared that, and I think it was telling when I was just thinking off the top of my head, but I said, Kazakhstan actually feels more like home to me than either a traditional Korean culture felt to me or a traditional mainstream American culture felt to me. And a lot of Korean Americans struggle with this. I think I'm speaking of something pretty common, where I fit and how I fit in terms of who I am, my upbringing, my culture, within these two worlds that I live in, is one where I just don't really feel part of either. And I don't know, the dynamic of many diverse things there made me feel that, am I really a Korean that was born in the United States that's actually Central Asian? Am I Kazakh in heart? And so there was this sense of connection and affinity to the people. And I shared with her that it felt like home to me. Like I had discovered home after 40 years. And so there was a strong connection and that was very powerful for me, very life-giving. But besides just that sense of connection was the burden of the churches. I think when I was in Kazakhstan, especially as I was working with the leaders at this conference, which was a 6-day conference, I felt like the epistles in the Bible, which are really letters sent to the early churches, was exactly the reality of Central Asia. That's that first generation church of the church in the first 10 years of existence, really just trying to understand itself and to grow and spread the gospel and to be the body of Christ and the issues that they were having with infighting and the theological concerns and wrestling that was taking place. All the things that we see that are happening in the epistles is where the church is at right now. It's that pivotal stage of what is going to happen to the church of Jesus Christ in that part. And the time really is now. The church is either going to find a way to grow and survive and expand and build, and the gospel will be spread in a large portion of the world that it's not really in right now, or this struggling church of Jesus Christ in that part of the world is just going to continue to struggle and not quite make it and be diffused, especially with all the other influences that are coming in. And that sense just kind of was there for me. And I came back to Flushing, where I was at a Korean American church in Flushing. And if you've been to Flushing, there are like 200 churches within 10-mile radius. And I'm thinking of the one church, that you have to go 600 miles to go to the next Methodist church, or 1,000 miles. And the reality of what happens if one of those churches dies, as opposed to what happens in Flushing if one of the 200 churches, or even my church, disappears. And if I'm very humble and very honest, I don't think it'll be that significant. Maybe I can offer something. People like me as a pastor, but I think people that are searching for the gospel and for a church, they're going to find something because there's so much of it. I really had that kind of existential struggle when I came back home. I'm here in a country that whatever you want and however you want it and wherever you want to go to find what you need to find, especially from a religious perspective, is it's just there. If you search, you can find it. But it's not there. They don't have leaders. They don't have resources. The church is struggling. And again, God just burdened me with a heart for the church in that part of the world. And as Pastor Dave was sharing, I think I'm not a very arrogant kind of person, because there's not many things that I feel overly confident that I'm really good at. But I think the one thing that I have some knowledge in, and probably just one thing, my wife would share the same thing, is that I know a little bit about the church. As a pastor's kid, growing up as a pastor's kid, and in my extended family, I have 6 uncles and 5 cousins that are in ministry. And in terms of my father, he wasn't the kind of pastor like my wife, whose dad worked in the same church for 40 years. My dad went every 4 or 5 years to a new church all throughout the United States. And now as a pastor for the last 15 years of full-time ministry, one thing I know and I've been exposed to and experienced is the church and how to develop the church and what it means to be the church in diverse contexts. And so it was like sensing like that it was a match, that Kazakhstan and that part of the world had something to offer me. I had so much to learn and to grow, and then I was blessed through that culture. And it will continue to challenge and transform me. But the one thing that I can have or have some knowledge or understanding of over the course of my life is the church. And the church and the state of the church right now is so pivotal in Central Asia. Right? And so again, this is the beginning of the sense of calling that it's going to be a big step, a huge step of faith for me and my family to go there, but that God is truly calling us there. And this gets to the sort of sermonette that I want to give to you today, which we're going to get to the scriptures in a moment. I feel like people are inspired a lot, that God speaks to people through experiences, especially opportunities to serve in some type of mission, some type of giving context. And the issue is not so much the lack of feeling inspired or compelled towards something. The real issue is in moving towards something, what it's going to require to let go in order to move that way. And that's really what I want to focus on in terms of my message, right? So I've led a lot of short-term mission trips with a lot of my church, and I would say that the majority of the people that would go on a short-term mission trip, some of you might have experienced this, at some point, because of the power of that experience, come back at least thinking about the idea of, is God perhaps calling me to mission? Because again, the sense of importance, the sense of the reality of what God is doing in that context is so powerful, it's so riveting. But they come back And they think about the fact that, how can I leave this country? What are my parents going to think? My parents, some of us, immigrated to the United States so that I can have a better life, not that I go back to a third world country. How am I going to leave my friends? How am I going to leave my family? What about the dreams that I have of what I'm going to become? Can I live in a context that's not secure or as comfortable or provides the things that I'm used to having? And as soon as that kind of thought begins to happen, that perhaps God is calling to missions, it just goes away. Well, attachments in and of themselves, to be attached to family or to things or to want some type of, comfortable life for myself and my family, while these kind of attachments, I would say, in and of themselves may not be bad, I believe our over-reliance on them and ultimately placing the things that we are attached to, the things that if God were to ask us, can you let go of this? And we say, please God, not just this. I can't do that, or I can't do that right now. Ultimately, it's that kind of thing where we can't let go of it and become such a central part of our life, and it dictates how we live our life and what decisions we make. If attachments that we have become that, then they become idolatrous. They're more important than what God is convicting me to do. Right? In the Bible, the rich ruler just can't follow Jesus because he can't let go of the one thing that he's attached to, which in his case is money. And Jesus said, I'm sorry, you can't be my disciple then. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I'm going to go into a little bit of Bible here, because I think the Bible talks a lot about attachments. And I'm sorry that my verses, I'm going to refer to different verses, it's going to be different things. But the notion of attachment in the Bible, as I shared with you, Jesus warns about the attachment to money and material things. Jesus says you can't serve both God and money. And for many people, especially in American culture, it's just part of capitalism, it's part of the culture of prosperity and wanting to better our life. Material security can sometimes be, it's not that we're rich, but that material security is more important than perhaps what it is God may be calling you to. Jesus warns also about the attachment to relationships. There's a man who wants to follow Jesus, and he says, Jesus, before I go, just let me bury my father. I mean, it sounds like a reasonable thing to ask. Jesus says, let the dead bury themselves, but you come and follow me. Indeed, there's a broader notion of becoming attached to our life. And that's in John 12, where we read from today. It says, anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Again, the things of the betterment of my life, and that life, is about good things and about, to love that kind of life is to ultimately lose it. And in 1 John 2:15 through 16, it says, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love of the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust in the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And so, again, the scriptures are saying, if you become too attached to the values and the desires and the ambitions of this world, then you can't do that and also follow. And so you see this theme of, if we become overly attached to people, to places, to things, to our desires, to our ambitions, then it's incompatible with following the direction of God. And in each of these scriptures, It's not, just try to work on it. It's like you choose which one you ultimately want to follow. Do you want to follow me, or are you attached to certain things that you just can't let go of those attachments for my sake? On the other hand, we can see in the Old Testament and the New Testament a theme of, and this is, if you look from Genesis to Revelation, you'll see this theme over and over again, the theme of being ready to detach yourself, of leaving our attachments behind to follow where God leads us. Some theologians have actually written extensive research on this and called it pilgrim theology. What it means to be a Christian is that we live a pilgrim life, a life that's on the go, and we're going towards some heaven, like the scripture said today in Hebrews, we're striving towards some heavenly kingdom, but our kingdom and our home is not here. And there's nothing that we can really fully be attached to here. We just continue to go forward to where God is calling us. And so Abraham leaves his country to seek the promised land. And it says in today's scripture, if they, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, had been thinking of the country that they had left, if they had been longing for the attachments or the things that they would have to leave in order to follow the promised land, if they had been thinking about the country they left, they would have had opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country. They were pilgrims on a journey, able to detach and leave things behind to seek where God was calling. We see the history of the Israelites are pilgrims on a journey, journeying through the desert. They picked up their tents and they moved here and they moved there, and wherever God was calling them, they were moving toward that, and they were able to detach physically from whatever it is to move to the next thing. Eventually, in the period of exile in the Old Testament, the Israelites became the diaspora, which is a scattered people. No home, no central location, no real culture, but struggling to be and to go where God is calling them in this scattered reality. And in the New Testament, Jesus and the disciples constantly on the move, going from region to region, leaving behind many people and things in the process. God has a plan for our life, and according to the scriptures, that plan requires us to be able to let go of things, especially those things we may become overly attached to. It's easy for me to sound like I, let go of whatever attachment as if I'm, just able to easily do that. But it's taken 2 years of God completely breaking me down of my attachments. See, I shared that, there were things that I was feeling called to and compelled by. But honestly, I would not have been able to respond to the call to go to Kazakhstan if it wasn't for a 2-year process of God literally pulling away everything that I could possibly be attached to. And at the time, I thought it was, curse God for suffering in my life. But now I see what God was doing. So I want to share a little bit about that process for me. 2 years ago, I was serving at a church in upstate New York that I'd been at for the last 6 years. And it was the kind of church context that I felt like I could be there long term. Because, again, it was a church that was growing. It was a church where, I really saw how God was moving in the life of that church. It's not just like lots of people started talking, but really real deeply spiritual things were beginning to happen. God's breakthrough was happening in this church. And it took a while, but we're getting there, and we're just beginning to see that in year 6. And it just happened to be not only a wonderfully dynamic ministry that I felt connected to, but it also happened to have what I was looking for myself and my family, which was this church was blessed with a beautiful 3-acre piece of land that the house, 4-bedroom house, 2-car garage lived on, right across the street from the church. You can't beat the commute. With the stream running in the back and the deer, eating the berries in your backyard. In a new area, in a developing area with a good school system. They had just built a new school. It was a wonderful place for my daughter. It was a very communal town where everyone knew each other, and I was the pastor of the town, and I felt connected to the people in the community, and it really was, I don't know if you're 20, anything I'm making makes sense, but when you're 40, you might understand. Like, these things are important to me, most people, that age, that, okay, it's vital in terms of my vocation. It's an ideal place for me to settle down and raise my children. I love the people. I love the surrounding community. I mean, this is perfect. And I get a call, again, two years ago from the bishop saying, I need you to consider an emergency move, emergency appointment, because there's a church where they had just left the Methodist denomination. It was a Korean American church. And it's split, and so they need a pastor to continue to minister to because the pastor left with the majority of the congregation. We need a pastor to come and to continue to revive that congregation. But because it would be a smaller congregation, in the Methodist church it's called 2-point charge, so being pastor of 2 different churches, so that would be 3/4 time. And then in Queens, there's a quarter-time church. It's sort of a dying Anglo church where everyone's over the age of 65. But, they're lovely people. There's opportunity for you to develop the church because Queens has a lot of people and has a nice parsonage that's connected to it. And Vision Christian Fellowship, this Korean American church, they're struggling financially. They're struggling. 75% of their people left. So, so you can live here and you can pastor and try to develop or revive these 2 congregations. And again, to make a long story short, although it's already somewhat long, I felt God calling me to do this. And so this wasn't something that you have a year to plan to move your family. It's like, okay, so you need to start next month. You need to move your family to Flushing. And a couple days before I was actually going to move, the most bizarre thing happened. In the church that I was with the parsonage, the smaller dying church, it was in the New York Times, it was struck by lightning and burned to the ground, the church. And the parsonage was next to it was damaged to a degree that nobody could live there anymore. Oops. And then the first Sunday of the other church, the Korean American church I went to, and I realized that there was nobody there from the other church. And basically I asked, is there anyone from the Vision Christian Fellowship that is here today? And finding out a little bit more research after that following Sunday, there was some type of agreement or covenant made by the church that everyone would leave together. But the bishop and the Methodist church, they didn't get that information. The memo didn't come across. So, oops, we had this guy out of an ideal situation move his whole family to Queens. Sorry, the place we thought you were going to live, you can't live there anymore. And then the other church that we thought you would be the pastor of, did I fail to mention that there's no people? And you can't go back because the other pastors come, everything, the system, you're set. You just have to make most of it. And so the last 2 years were a difficult process where one of the churches, the older church that burned to the ground, the parsonage, for 2 years we've been living with my parents who lived in Queens. Because again, we didn't have a home. All our stuff that we're going to move was in storage for 2 years. During that 2 years, the church that burned to the ground went through a process of closing down, and we merged it with the neighboring church because they had a good relationship, and that church was thriving. And this church, everyone was almost over the age of 70. There were 10 people, and I said, "Hey, let's go through a building project." And and they're like, "No, easy does it, young pastor. Our time has come, and we're not there anymore. We're not building a church. We'll go to the neighboring church." All right, so my process was to help them go to that church and to officially close the church down. And then the other appointment, after 2 years, the money which we inherited dissolved, and we just finished the legal process of dissolving the incorporations, and that church is no longer an official church, but has entered back into the mother church that it grew out of. Kind of like an EM here that grew to enough size where it became independent and chartered. We dissolved the charter, we legally closed down the church, and we moved everyone back into the mother church. But I was assigned 2 years of closing 2 churches. And I talk candidly about it, but I was angry, and I was asking God, what? Sometimes people think when you don't understand what God is doing, that perhaps God's just throwing dice, like it's just random. And in this case, let's just see if Eumin can, like Job, right? Let's just see if he can endure, how much he can endure, if he's really faithful. And that's what I thought God was doing. Just, you want me to endure, so you're just going to make me suffer, God, for no apparent reason. But here's the thing. I was sharing that it was a 2-year process of letting go of attachments. I want to share the things that I learned to let go of over those 2 years. I completely learned to let go of material things. All of our furniture, all of the things that we ever owned in our life were in storage for 2 years. And by the end of 2 years, I realized I don't need any of it. It's inconsequential. And again, you'll see how this relates to going on missions. It's easy then if material things mean nothing to you. And you've learned that to say yes to missions, right? And if that was God's bigger plan. I was attached to things like success and ministry growth and upward trajectory. Most 40-year-old people are. That you don't want to, at worst, you're going to do a lateral move. At best, you want to do a move that's better. And in churches, that's the same thing. Pastors, that's the same thing. Well, maybe there's more humbler pastors than me. But to me, I had gone from what I thought was high to rock bottom in terms of vocation and what it means to minister and what it means to pastor churches. And to me, God had just completely obliterated this notion that somehow the next step needs to either be lateral or better. It didn't mean anything to me. He allowed me to relinquish my attachment to relationships through congregations. Again, the first one 6 years ago was difficult, but the last 2 years it was just a transitory ministry. And so the attachment to people within my congregation, to relationships, I was at a place where I was able to kind of let that go. And so I was open to wherever God, it's not like I just leave a beloved congregation. That happened several years before. During that same time, I was diagnosed with diabetes. And I had relinquished the attachment that I had that somehow my life would be at least 70 years or older because I'm a healthy guy. And the reality set in that life is short, and what is it, God, that you want me to do? Again, all this happened at the same time, and so when I went to Kazakhstan last year, the things that most people have struggled with, I didn't have any of those things. So if I'm just seeing what God is doing and the possibility of what God wants, I can say yes, because the attachment part I've dealt with. There's nothing I'm attached to. And it occurred to me, that I think that's the same with most Christians, especially here in America. There's so many times where God is moving and speaking in their lives, but it's the things, the people, the materials, the dreams, the hopes, the expectations of others that they are attached to. And it's like the soil, that it goes in the ground, but there's too many rocks. And so it just, whatever God inspires you with, it just doesn't stay too long because you just can't let go. You can't do what it takes to say yes and to let go of these other things that you might need to let go of. I'm not saying everyone in this room is called. The sermon's a little long. I'm sorry, David. I'm not saying everyone in this room is called to missionary service, but I am certain, although I do believe that there are probably, within every context, those that are called to missionary service but are struggling with the attachment portion. But I am certain that in this room, most people have things that they are attached to that make it very, very difficult for them to truly heed and to follow and go in the direction that God is truly, ultimately leading them toward. I'll say the majority of people are struggling with some forms of letting go. There was a college student in my ministry who was finishing her senior year, and she said, she shared with me too, that, and it was convincing, with conviction and with tears, that, ultimately God wants me to be some type of service for my life. And I don't know what that is, but after college, I think it's a great time for me to join the Peace Corps and to begin to see what a life of service is. And I mean, it was convincing. About a month before she was to follow through on that whole process, she fell in love, and really head over heels in love. And he was a senior in college at the time. His plans were to go to Korea and to do some teaching there. And so she kind of readapted her sense of service to, maybe I can serve in Korea somehow. And just began to share, I don't know if really the Peace Corps is where God is calling me. I don't mean to sound insensitive, but I just feel that's this microcosm of most people. That God is wanting something of your life. But there's these other things. It just, I can't do it, God. The rich ruler that just shakes, I can't let go of these dreams or this stability or my fears of what I'm going to enter into, or, I just can't do it. I'll close with this story. The reason God wants us to let go is because the plan of God is that much grander and more beautiful for your life. Not just so that you can show that you're faithful. My wife, who's the better half, she went through a painful process of letting go when I first entered ministry. She was in a PhD program, and she received a full fellowship, which means that they're going to pay for her to do her PhD. And so she was the top scholar or candidate that this school had invested into for her to get her PhD in American history. She shared with me at the time that, the PhD would mean so much because it would fulfill all the dreams of her parents. They lived a struggling immigrant life, but if they had a daughter that is a PhD, that is a scholar, that has attained a certain status and knowledge and has some type of comfort and finding, that it would fulfill all the struggles of her parents. Not only that, she would love to be called professor. And she likes to be smart and to reveal how smart she is to people. She went through a process where I was serving as a youth pastor, and during that time she was helping me out a lot. And God had convicted her heart at the time that she was to serve youth. And so she got to a point where she had to let go. She had to choose. And ultimately she let go of the full fellowship, the full ride for however many years to get her PhD. She just let go of it. To follow an ambiguous call, it wasn't even clear how, serving youth. And over the last 6 years, it's been hard for her because she had let go of this, but it still wasn't clear. She was a youth director, but it wasn't clear how she was ultimately to follow through on this call. Well, when I was asked to be a missionary, the missionary agency, the Methodist Missionary Agency said, you know, nowadays missionaries send two people. They send the couple. And it's not like she's following you. You're going to be co-directors. And in fact, because of her expertise, we want her to focus in Central Asia on children, youth, and women, and really develop ministries and programs for those people. Now, I go back 8 years ago when she was in the PhD program. If she was going down that road, there's no way on earth we're going to Kazakhstan. And so, you know, and God's going to really use her gifts. And she's going to flourish like she's never flourished before. I'm certain of it. It's a time of Advent, and I just pray that for all of us, you know, that we'd be able to reflect on the things that we're attached to. And we'd be able to ask the fundamental question of, for the sake of God and where God is leading, am I willing to let go of this? And I think that if we come to that place where we can say yes to letting go, then God will just, I mean, beyond what we can imagine, God will just do something with our life that we can't even imagine. And the bounty and the blessing, the fulfillment, and the meaning and riches of that life is incomparable to the life that you think that you should be living. Let us pray.